Okay, good morning. Hemshech Chaim Beis, volume 2. We are on page 1164. 1164. Okay. The discussion here has been about Atzilus. Now, I think I mentioned, I'll say it again. Atzilus was a very central theme in the early part of Ayin Beis. When I say early, I mean literally from chapter 5 and on. When he began the Hemshech, the whole discussion there was about the 10 spheres, what he called Eres Pnimim, Pnimi, the divine energy that manifests within existence. And the quintessential, you could say, template of that perfect balanced world and harmony of Eres and Kalim, energies and containers, is Atzilus. And that's why Atzilus serves the role of being the ultimate interface, because it allows, as he put it, the tachlis of Atzilus is to give us the ability, us meaning the creatures of the world of Biyah, including Asiya, Gashmis, Chumris, the world in which we are in, to have a perception, Yediyah Nelikus, an understanding of the divine, and Hargosha, and feeling of the divine. Without Atzilus, basically there'd be a schism, there'd be a gap. The divine would be here, we would be here. Yesh Amiti, Yesh Anivra. So Atzilus, as explained all the way back then, served as that interface, and that's why there was a long discussion whether Atzilus is Gilead Helem or is Atzilus Yesh Ayin. Basically, is Atzilus divine or is Atzilus part of existence? And you see the same thing, the same, I don't say struggle, the same what's the word I'm looking for? Dance is taking place here. Atzilus, on one hand, it's an elam of Atzilus. It's a structured world with gedarim, with structured spheres. On the other hand, it's a lakus, iyu v'chayu yichad, iyu v'garmu yichad. It's kuli lakus, like he said. And thus, Atzilus becomes the interface between das elyon and das tachten. That's what he's essentially saying here. That Atzilus is the place where das elyon reflects more the divine perspective, and das tachten is the world's perspective, existence perspective. And he explained it within the context of Pasach Eliyahu, that it begins by first saying, Antu chad v'lei b'chushban. You are one, but not a measurable one. Because he's talking about, as he said, the 10 hidden spheres, where everything is united. Then he says, Antu dafikas eser tikunen b'karinan lon eser sfirin. And you're the one that from you emerged, Afika, from you emerged 10 tikkunim, what he calls garments, and they are called spheres. And what's the difference between the two? Now we're talking about Atzilus. In Atzilus, you have 10 spheres that are defined. That's why they're called emerging. They're kavyachal, so to speak, outside of the core essence of the divine that's unfiltered, which is Ein Sof, spheres, Ein Ketz, or beyond spheres even. And what are the two expressions? Because levushim and spheres reflect these two aspects of Atzilus, of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. On one hand, they're garments, so they are not the essence itself. Levushim le'erein sof, basically they are the instruments, the way God expresses himself to create. Loshen midas, that's midas, measure, yeah. And the other hand, they're called spheres. These spheres are illuminators. They illuminate the divine. They're not just concealers and the ones that structure and that define existence, but they also illuminate spheres from the word spheres behiris, illuminating spheres. Gilead. So you see in Atzilus both aspects. And he made it clear this isn't just the Eres and Kalim, because you could say the Eres reflect the divine, the Kalim reflect the structure. Even the Eres themselves are rooted in the 10 hidden spheres. So you see that there's the concept of structure even in the highest levels, and that manifests in the Eir as it manifests inside the Kali. Now on page 1164, we began learning. So now he's going to explain another expression in the Pasach Eliyahu. Then he talks about the expression Levushin Tikinuslon. He dressed it up with garments. And now he's talking about Biyah, not Atzilus. So we have the word levushim twice in Pasuk Eliyahu. One, we said, Dafikus Eser Tikunin, that out of the oneness emerged 10 levushim, which are the 10 garments of Atzilus. But then he says, and he dressed it further with more garments, and these are the garments of Biyah that create now a Yesh. Remember, the garments of Atzilus are still a Lakus, but they're already somewhat of a structure, a Lakus as it manifests in structure. So now he goes to distinguish between these two types of levushim. That's what we began learning, and we're in the middle of a parenthesis, which we'll review now. But first, let's say the difference. So he says, you could say that what is the difference between these two levushim? He says there are two types of levushim. Levush atzmi, levush hanifrid. A levush atzmi means a levush, a garment that's part of the core essence of the thing. Like he'll say a little later, like a snail, a creature that has the shell, its shell, which is a garment, is part of its very being. It's not like a coat or a shirt you put on. A snail or a turtle and others, their shell and their garment is part of them. And then there's levush nifrad. It's a garment that's not part of the etzem. So here we see now in levush itself, two levels. Now, as we've seen many times throughout Ayin Beis, throughout Chassidus, there's a constant journey here, where something is connected, but not so connected. And you see it on every possible level, because remember, at the end of the day, the goal is to take a grobe, crass, and coarse yesh that's completely focused on self and self-indulgence and self-interest, and turn it into something refined and divine. That's not an easy process, as we all know. We struggle with it every second of our lives. And the question is, how refined have you become in your life? Really, it can be put in Chassidish language, is basically how much is the Keli dominant and how much is the dominant. And now we throw in also levushim. How the levush, how much of a levush is it? How thick is the garment and how distant is it and disconnected in its own consciousness from what's inside the garment, and how refined it is. Like say when the word klippa we know means shell. Klippa is not a bad thing. Klippa is a shell. An orange, every fruit, every vegetable has a shell. Now there's shells that are very, very thin and transparent, like let's say the shell of the peel of a grape or of an olive. Then there are ones that are a little thicker. Take an apple, the shell of an apple, the apple peel, a little thicker, an orange. You can go through all the species and you see how the shell gets thicker and thicker to the point where you have a nut. You can have an almond, but you can have a filbert, then you can have a walnut, and you can have a coconut. What do you see here? That if you put them in a hierarchy, the shells are either very, very thin and they right away you see the fruit within, or they're more concealed. The goal is to understand that the whole klippa, the shell, is only to protect the fruit within. Klippa shemer hasapri. That's the way it was before Chet Tzadas, as the Shalom writes. Chassidus cites this. Then we started worshiping the klippa. The klippa became an end in itself. The whole purpose of the shell of existence, which is the yesh of existence, is to reveal and express the divine fruit within. But it all depends where we stand. So when you talk about levushim, it's not a surprise that there's a levush hanifred would mean the levush is more separate from that which is inside the garment. A levush atzmi, it's still a levush compared to what's higher than it, but now at least it's an atzmi. So he's going to explain this is the difference between Atzilus and Biyah. It's two different types of levushim. One is a levush that's part and parcel and senses all the time. That's an expression of the divine. Like I mentioned, levush malchus. A king wears royal garments. So of course the garments are not who he is. He could take off the garment, but they reflect who he is. And then you can wear a garment that's completely not reflective of who you are. When it says that you should be a nation, a priest of kings, and a holy nation, The Rebbe brings from Zvachim, the Gemara, where one of the Tanoim was walking, and the future new emperor saw him walking, and he got off his horse and went to fix his gartel because his gartel was falling, that it should be in the right place. And the Gemara says, because he said, your mamlechas kain v'gei kodesh, big day kodesh, big day tiferes, your garment should reflect who you are. So you see, a garment can reflect who you are, or a garment can actually be the opposite. It can conceal who you are. So when we look at, like, when the famous story with the Rebbe Marash, so it was a chassid who was a businessman, and he always wore kapot on Shabbos, and he dressed up. One day he's wearing secular clothes, so to speak, his weekday, his regular suit on Shabbos. So the Rebbe Marash asked him, what is this? So he says, I don't want to be a hypocrite. Till now, the truth is, I'm a businessman. And I was wearing a garment, Shabbos, just because everybody was. So I'm dressing to what's fitting to who I am. And the Rebbe Marash said to him, I thought it was the other way around. That the truth is, you're a chassid and a kapote. And 6 days of the week, you're dressing up because that's what you need to do in the secular world. So bottom line is, I'm just pointing out this concept of levushim has both elements. It's another form of element. Now you could say, what about kalim? So kalim is a higher level than levushim. Kalim are not oyer, but they're also not levushim. So we're in the middle of discussing this two sides of the levush. So let's go on, and he brings an example from Kochas HaNefesh. Kochas HaNefesh. So what about the faculties of the soul? Are they the soul, or are they outside forces? Now we know the faculties of the soul are not outside forces, as in wearing a shirt or a jacket or a coat. They're definitely not outside forces like our furniture. They're definitely faculties of the soul, but yet they're not the soul itself. So he's coming to explain, like I just said with the levushim, is it part and parcel of the entity levusha atzmi, or is it something outside? So he's going to explain kochas hanefesh. On one hand, they are not the nefesh, but on the other hand, they're connected to the nefesh and they express the nefesh. That's the theme of what we're going to be learning in the next page. The structure. Now I'm going to learn. So we learned so far is the following. I'm just going to go over it briefly. He says, "V'yuvan zel derech moshel." I'm reading from line v'yuvan zeh on page 1164. It's around 6, 9, 12 lines from the top. So he's giving an example of kochas hanefesh, faculties of the soul. Shein levushim el hanefesh. They're called garments of the nefesh. Now, garment is a very broad word. Remember, garment can be a garment that's completely outside of you and not even reflecting you are. Garment could also be an expression of the soul. So see, levushim el hanefesh. So he says like this. Like he says, I'm going to read. Should I read this whole thing? Yeah, I'm going to read here. Why not read it again? It doesn't hurt. Okay, levushim el hanefesh. The hari hanefesh er poshet. Why is it called the levush? Why don't you say it's the nefesh itself? Because it's a faculty of the soul. The soul is beyond it, because the soul itself is a er poshet, is a shapeless, seamless energy. That's not defined by a distinction of faculties. Like he says in Tanya, on the other hand, the faculties of the soul, the seichel u'midas, cognitive and emotional faculties, einon atzmis hanefesh. They're not the core soul. They're faculties of the soul. They're expressions of the soul. They are attributes of the soul. It says in Sefer Shalbeinu, Mashikosa b'Sefer Shalbeinu, Perek Gimel, in chapter 3, he said, Sha'aseichel midas ein atzmus hanefesh. There it does say atzmus hanefesh. He says, Zeu rak legabe halevushim de machshava dibra maises shem Perek Dalet sham. That's only because he's speaking in context in regard to what he says in chapter 4 there in Tanya about the levushim of thought, speech, and action. So thought, speech, and action are not atzmis hanefesh as much as the kochas are. So the kochas, compared to the garments of the expression, whether it's through thinking or through speaking or through doing, they are levushim. So compared to that, the kochas are atzmis hanefesh. But in truth, but at the core root, also the faculties are only containers and garments of the nefesh. However, they're a different type of garment. They're a garment that can be removed. Machshava dibra ma'aser can be shifted and changed every given moment. You could speak about one thing and then speak about another thing. You could think about one thing, think about another, speak. Same thing with action. The koiches are like the shell of the, it sounds weird, but like the shell of the snail. They're expressions of the nefesh. They're not outside forces, but they're also not atzmis nefesh, not the core essence of the nefesh. So it would be like saying, if someone says to you, let me ask you something about yourself or about another person. Tell me something about you, or tell me about someone else. And you'll say, that person is a smart person. He's a sensitive person. He's a giving person. And I'll say, is that who the person's essence is? You'll say, no, that's what he is defined by, his personality. His essence, I don't know his essence. His essence may be concealed. We don't know what he's really made of. Not that he's faking it, but you're expressing, like I always point out when people say, who are you? They give you their business card. That's what you do. That's not who you are. Your faculties are how you're defined by. You're defined by your faculties, whether it's wisdom or emotion, intelligence or emotions and so on. But the core you can say, that would be more etzem. You could say you're here, your mission in this world is to make a dira b'tachtenim. That defines your neshama itself. The personality type, the characteristics, and the faculties themselves are your attributes. Okay. I think earlier he may have even said that Shema Etzem and Shema Toyar and Shema Pu'ula. So Shema Toyar would be more of a description of your faculties, and Shema Etzem would be you yourself. So when you say someone is Ruvain, you're not saying anything about their personality. One Ruvain can be very different than another Ruvain. Like we said before about Melech. Just because you say someone's a Melech, you don't know what type of Melech he is. So that's the difference between. So the koiches stand right in between the atzmis hanefesh and the levushim of machshava dibra ma'aser. That's essentially what he's saying here. The kamoisha amoyach hagashmi, just as the physical brain, hurak keli lekoyach haseichel. Now he's using a physical example of the body. The physical brain is only a container for seichel, for the power of intelligence and wisdom. Hamispashit ma nefesh, that extends from the nefesh. So you have the nefesh, you have the seichel, and you have the moyach gashmi. Three things. Kach al derech zeh, same thing. Koyach haseichel shem nefesh hurak keli lemuhus v'atzmus hanefesh. So just like the physical brain is a keli for the intelligence is a keli for the etzem hanefesh. Lemuhus v'atzmus hanefesh. Okay. So now we go to the parentheses. The parentheses is both important and also parentheses, obviously. What he's going to say in the parentheses is vital because he's going to explain, and this is also important to the interface, that as much as he's saying that it's a keli, is only a keli and a lavush to the etzem hanefesh, and it's not the etzem hanefesh, and yet it's not like a garment like thought, speech, and action. It is a manifestation of the nefesh. So he's going to make a closer connection between the koyach and the nefesh, which of course will help us also understand when we get back to Atzilus and Biyah, that even though Atzilus has levushim, the spheres are levushim, but they're levushim that express the divine. They're not levushim that are outside of the expression. Like the difference between explaining an idea and using a mashal zar, a mashal from another subject to explain this idea. So the explanation of the idea is clearly not the core idea. It's an explanation of it, but you're also not using another idiom, another paradigm to explain this. A mashal is necessary when you don't understand the idea itself. So I need to bring a garment, so to speak, that you do relate to, that initially is not part of the idea, and I'm going to use an example to explain the idea. So he's going to say now that the koiches hanefesh are an in-between place. On one hand, yes, they're not the etzem, but they express the etzem, to the point that Chochma and seichel is the highest form of expression of the neshama, more than the lower faculties. You may recall when we learned about koyach hatanua and movement, he called that the lowest of all faculties, because all it is movement, doesn't need any effort. Koyach HaSeichel, he explained, was a much higher one. He used that, and that was, I think, back in Sadik Daled when he explained the difference between, explaining the difference between two different things there. Got already what it was. Does someone remember? Koyach HaMaisa and Koyach, oh yeah. The difference between the Seichel Maisa, Chochma, the Seichel and Maisa in craftsmanship, and the Chochmas HaNefesh. Chochmas HaMaisa and Chochmas HaNefesh. What did he distinguish there? He's talking about the difference in Ein Zoloscha and Efes Biltacha. I don't remember right now. Okay, so let's learn the parentheses now. Now comes the qualification. So as much as the faculties are not the etzem yet, Ella, however, but Ella Chochma hi areish lekol hakeches v'klei hanefesh. Chochma, wisdom, is the head of all the faculties, not just physical head, but meaning the top of all the faculties, the most superior of all of them, and klei hanefesh. All the keches and the klei hanefesh and the containers for the nefesh. Which of course are the keches, they're klei hanefesh. Shein shar hates keches. What is it a head to? It's the top of the other 9 faculties. So we know there are 10 faculties. Chochma being a das chesed v'ur teferes netzach hed yesod malchus. And Chochma is the top primary, on the ladder of hierarchy, the highest faculty. Chochma hi moker habina. Chochma is the root, the source of bina, of understanding, v'hamidus, and the emotions. In other words, everything begins with a spark of an idea, a concept. Whatever will come, whether it'll be understanding like bina or emotions, had to start with some flash. Nothing begins on its own. So Chochma is the beginning, like the Yud. That is the first point you make before you write any letter. So Chochma is the first point you reach in consciousness, to whether it's Seichel or Midas. Everything starts with the flash of Chochma. So now he says, V'hanefesh. So what did he establish here? That even though the faculties are not the etzem hanefesh, but Chochma has a particular uniqueness, there is a hierarchy. It's closer to the nefesh than the other faculties. That's what he's going to say now. And the spirit, the soul, even though on its own, it's beyond seichel. The soul is not defined by seichel. The soul is beyond seichel. The soul has other things that are beyond seichel, and even seichel originates in the soul, not the other way around. Makol mokim. Nevertheless, ikir hashra'osa, the primary residence, the primary place, dwelling place of the soul, vislabshusa, and its manifestation and clothing inside the faculties, inside the human being, he b'keich haseichel, is in the power of intelligence. So the soul is above it, but where does the soul reside? In the mind. So think of it like when it says the Eibishter is above the Mishkan, obviously. God is beyond all structures. And yet he chose v'asur li migdash v'shachanti b'seicham. And where in the Migdash itself? In the moyach of the Migdash, the Aron Habris and Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Aron HaKodesh, where the Torah is. It's like God manifests in his wisdom. So you can't say wisdom is God, but where is the manifestation, the dwelling place, they call it Hashra of the Nefesh? Primarily, it starts in the mind. And from there, the Yotza HaKoel, the voice of God, went out to Oyel Moyed and was heard by all the people. It all started with the Beishnei Badei Aron. The Aron HaKodesh is where the Shechina resides within the Mishkan itself. So though the Mishkan has many kelim, has Meneda, has a Mizbeach, has a Shulchan, Mizbeach HaChitzon, and other parts, yet where's the Shechina's primary location is in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Kodesh Kodashim, What is that in the human being? That's the mind. What is it? What is it with God? It's Torah, Chochma shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. So bottom line is Chochma is the place with Iker Hashrasa Vislapshusa Bukei Chasech. Now comes another parenthesis in the parentheses, and I beg to differ with their footnote here. I read it through. I think this parenthesis ends the next line. They suggesting it ends with a big parenthesis, ends on the next page. And I would say no. It ends at I'll show you where I think it ends. Because now he adds another point. He's saying there's a reason now. Where do we see this manifest? That we call the L'chein Nikra HaNefesh. That's why the Nefesh called Nefesh HaMaskelis. We say the human Nefesh is a Nefesh HaMaskelis. It's a spirit that is intelligent spirit. When you say, for example, in Shayichud V'Amunah he brings that every part of existence has a Nefesh. Diamond, mineral, Semeach and Chai. But the Arizal in Eitz Chaim calls the Nefesh of Chai, Nefesh HaChai, or Nefesh Chiyunis. Its Nefesh is defined by being a life force, an animal, it's a life force. Semeach is called Nefesh HaTzemeches. It's a Nefesh that's defined by it growing. And the Daimim is called Nefesh HaDememes, or Nefesh HaDeimim, Nefesh HaDememes, a mineral form of life. But when you call a Madaber, you say Nefesh HaMaskelis. It's a nefesh that is intelligence. Now, of course, an animal has a certain measure of intelligence, but it's not defined by its intelligence. Its intelligence is called seichel hanikna, intelligence to survive, to hunt, to breed, to fulfill its function. But the maskelis in the full sense of the word is seichel, that you can imagine, you can dream, you can even conquer and control animals that are stronger than you are. A human can outwit an animal. Animal cannot outwit a human. Could be stronger than a human. But if you put it pure seichel, the nefesh hamaskelis defines the person. So you see from this that even though the nefesh itself is higher than seichel, he's defining shema toyar, he's calling the nefesh, how do we describe the nefesh of a human being? An intelligent soul, an intelligent spirit. Why? Because like he just said, because in seichel resides, the nefesh that's beyond seichel resides in seichel.
That called a third nefesh, like there's an animal soul and a godly soul, and this is a third one, or is it part of one of the others, or a combination of both? How does that work?
In Tanya, he brings about two nefashos, nefesh alikis and nefesh abamis. In other places, in Chassidus talks about nefesh asichlis. So the Maimorim say, the Maimorim that's talked about Chaviv Adam, Tafshin Beis, and other places, says that even though in Tanya only says, Tzemach Tzedek also brings it. Two, there are really three. And there's a discussion where the Nefesh HaSichlis belong. Sometimes it's called in between the two. Sometimes the Nefesh HaSichlis, if the Seichel of the Nefesh HaLikis is dominating, so the Nefesh HaSichlis, so to speak, is channeling the divine. If the Nefesh of the Seichel Abamis is dominating, then the Nefesh HaSichlis is controlled by the animal soul. If to go look, there's a whole discussion in my Marim about it. And also why in Tanya only refers to two, and only once he mentions the third one, I think. But regarding our discussion here, Elikis and Ba'amis are definitely two forces. One is the divine soul, one is an animal soul. But if you want to define what makes a human being human, it's the intelligence of the human being that's his dominant feature that allows him to be, that he has an intelligence. So therefore you see intelligence as a description, or you could say what he calls here hashra. So even though, one second, that's why the nefesh is called nefesh hamaskelis, the nefesh, an intelligent spirit, due to the name al shem, due to the and the name of on the name of the seichel, the power of intelligence that extends from the soul, shanefesh misachedes im koyach haseichel v'achachma, because the nefesh unites with the power of intelligence and wisdom. I believe the parenthesis ends right here, because the rest of it can be read as a flow from before the parentheses. I'm not sure why they decided to move it all the way to the end. As a matter of fact, I would insist that it's not at the end, because the rest of this is all part of this discussion. The parentheses comes to add the nefesh hamaskelas part that is called nefesh hamaskelas. But the main point to say here is, it wants to say here, is that seichel, the nefesh resides and dwells in seichel. So you could have had a situation the other way around. You could have had a situation like this. The nefesh is an indivisible, shapeless force of energy. Let's call it a field of energy. God's nefesh is what? God breathed into the piece of earth, piece of clay, a breath of life. You have a living creature. Now, there are 10 faculties this creature is able to achieve due to its life force. But you could argue, obviously this is not the case, but I think it'll help understand that, you know what? Seichel and Malchus, or the most lofty intelligence, to the smallest act of movement, just moving your finger, are equal in the eyes of the soul, because they're all 10 expressions of the soul. What difference does the soul have if it's, like we said earlier, we learned that the energy of the soul is from the head to toe. Is there more energy of the soul in your head than there is in your toenail? No, it's one life force. And yet the Eibishter did not want it to be that way. He wanted a hierarchy. And the reason is for the same reason he wants Seder Shtalshalos, and the same reason he wants Eir Ein Sof, and all the levels, because he wants us to be able to climb. Well, first of all, he wants us to understand how the process of creation is progressive and structured. And he wants us to be able to climb the ladder. So he says the top of the ladder, the top of the faculties is Chochma. It's a very lofty, refined faculty. In there, the soul manifests in its most comfortable way. Obviously, the soul is still higher than it. The life force of the soul is an equalizer in the whole body. But Mitzad Giluyim, the mind, is the central nervous system. It's like Rosh Hashanah of the year. Like we said before, the Rosh. So that is the mind. Then from the mind will flow to Bina, to Das, from Chochma to Bina, to Das, to Midas, all the way to a small little action. So it gives us a sense that we can actually have a relationship with the soul through its different hierarchical stages. That's the point he's making here. So Seichel, in that sense, is Miskeich V'zehu. Now we continue. V'zehu, and this is what it says. V'chochma techaya ba'aleha. Chochma energizes, vitalizes ba'aleha, its owners. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. Chochma techaya ba'aleha. That when the simple meaning is that when a person has wisdom, it's a vitalizer. It refreshes, it energizes whoever owns, so to speak, the one who owns the Chochma, Bala Chochma, ba'aleha. So he's speaking out like this: Sha nefesh atzma l'mayla ma'aseichel. One second. I just want to make sure that the parentheses would read that. Yeah, I'm convinced the parentheses is after V'chochma. So now he says, what's Ba'aleha and what's Chochma? He says, Nefesh Atzma L'mayla Ma'aseichel is L'mayla. The Nefesh itself is higher than Seichel. U'lechein Nikra Ba'aleha Shel Chochma. That's why it's called Ba'aleha. So like you say, Baal Tshuva, the owner, the keeper of Tshuva, the owner. So Ba'aleha is the owner, is the Nefesh itself of wisdom. Ki Targum Baal Mora V'Rabin. The Targum, the Aramaic translation of Baal is Mora V'Rabin. Mora V'Rabin means a teacher and a master. Mora Mereinu V'Rabbeinu. That's a Mereinu V'Rabbeinu. Mereinu is a teacher, yeah, Mereira, and Rabbeinu, and our master, yeah, our Rebbe. So that's why Ba'aleha is the so-called the master and the teacher and master of Chochma, the Nefesh, the root of Chochma. U'mekol mokem ha-Chochma techaya Ba'aleha.
Rabbeinu is not master. Adonenu is a master. Rabbeinu is not a master. Adonenu is a master. But Moro
Rabbeinu
means
is that, so
Adonai.
what's the difference? Moirenu is a direct, Moira Hira, Moira, a guide and a teacher, basically.
Rabbeinu is higher.
Yeah, higher. So how would you define Mora v'Rabbin? Rabbin is almost also, Rabbeinu is also like, Adonenu is a real master, right? Adonenu, Moirenu v'Rabbeinu. Our master, Moirenu, our guide, v'Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu. They translate Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, our Rebbe, our leader, maybe leader. Not sure. But Kapon, it's called Baal, Baal. Umakol Mokim. So you would think if that's the case, so it works only one. It's only a one-way street. It's only a one-way street. The Baal controls the Chochma, but he says no. Chochma techaya Baal. Chochma enlivens and energizes and vitalizes Baal. Ki mitzad yeridas haneshama beguf. So let me stop. Nevertheless, Chochma techaya Baal. Like we said, because Chochma is actually the place where the nefesh so-called dwells in. So he says like this: Ki mitzad yeridas haneshama beguf. Due to the descent of the soul into the body, Haguf master al muhusav atzmusa. He's going to explain this now more at length. The guf conceals, covers up on the core and essence. Okay. He's going to explain why we need this chochmah. What do you need the chochmah to chay ba'alel? Ba'alel, the nefesh needs chochmah to give it life and energy. The nefesh doesn't need anything. The nefesh creates chochmah. Chochmah does not. The nefesh vitalizes chochmah, not the other way around. So he's going to explain now what this means. So it's a longer explanation. So bear with this. Okay. Due to the descent of the soul into the body covered up on the core and essence of the soul. Remember, we said the nefesh higher than seichel is the core and essence of the soul. The Ashleima says that Rebbe Rashab, and we can say that this is like it says, Siman Daled, that this is what it says in the Geras HaKedesh epistle, section 4, the B'chinas Pnimius Nekudas Halev, who B'chinas Golus V'Shivya B'Levushim Tzeyim V'Taivas Elam Haza. So he speaks about Golus there, and how Tzedakah, I believe, redeems the neshama. So he says that he defines it that the Pnimius, the Nekudas Halev, the inner point, the inner core or point of the heart, is in the form of Golus, is in exile, is displaced. V'Shivya, kidnapped, in being held hostage, in captivity. It's exiled and in captivity. Like it said, right, in captivity. B'levushim tseim, in dirty, soiled garments. V'taivas elam haza, and the desires of this world. So let's spell it out. The neshama is the purest possible entity. Tahira. It's connected to the divine, on its own. The Eibishter takes this neshama and thrusts it down to earth, puts it into a body and into an animal soul, and the neshama now has to contend with what? Imagine taking the purest, a pure, beautiful entity and putting it into this world. You're putting it into a world that's filled with corruption, hostile forces to the divine, selfishness, greed, injustice. People into themselves, basically the taivas of Elam Haza, the pleasures and indulgences that people are involved in. Imagine the soul in a place like that. It's called Golus and Shivya. This is true Golus, a true displacement. You took a Ben Melech or a Bas Melech, a king, a prince or a princess. Instead of being in a palace, enjoying, taking pleasure in the glow of the divine and the godliness, it now has to contend with and deal with what? A dirty world. Levushim same. It's levushim. The neshama still remains pure, but it's now in a world like that. So that's what he defines in Ageres Akedis Siman Daled. He say yesh leimer. This is what happens to the nefesh, the muhuz ve'atzmus ha-nefesh when it comes below. It's completely covered up. If you would see this pure soul sitting in a dirty prison with a bunch of criminals and corrupt forces, you wouldn't even be able to recognize it. You'd think it's just another one of those soiled, sullied, dirty garments, taking a king and putting it into dirty garments, soiled, dirty garments. I'm not trying to put anybody in a bad mood. I'm just trying to explain what he's saying here. We'll move on Sham. So he says that's the yesh leim.
It's not that you would not be able to recognize. This is how the nefesh feels there, surrounded with all of them, which is a big torture for her.
Yeah. But it's possible you wouldn't be able to recognize because you'd see it as dark and then as black, the same clothing like the rest. Anyway, the point is not recognition. The point he's saying it's a golus v'shivir. That's the bottom line. That haguf mastir. The key here is that the body covers up on the muhuz va'atzmus hanefesh. So there is a cover up going on. That's the key thing he wants to say here. The hester. Okay. That's why I said you don't recognize because it's hester. Now he says umuv on sham, and it's understood there in Ageres Hakedesh. This is previous nukudis halev. The b'chinas chitzenis halev he yeser bizgalus. Paradoxically, the outer part of the heart is more revealed than the inner part. The inner part is concealed. The outer part is revealed, or more revealed. Or you could say al kaponim, or at least shebenakil yeser lahavi liyadeis galus b'chinas chitzenis halev. So either it's more revealed, or al kaponim, at least it's easier to bring it to reveal it, to bring it to a state of revelation. What to bring? What the outer dimension of the heart, which refers to not the atzmus hanefesh, shezeh b'chinas hamechin v'amidus. It's the mind and the emotions, the intellect and the emotions. So let's briefly review what he's saying now. What he's basically saying is the one that is most concealed is the etzem hanefesh. The pure core of the nefesh is more concealed. The faculties of the nefesh, there's more hope, so to speak, in a sense, to stimulate the mind or the emotions of the soul, which is of the heart, the outer part of the heart, is either more revealed or easier to stimulate, or at least easier to reveal. That's what he's saying right now. We're not finished yet. He's giving an explanation to why Chochma techaye ba'aleha, why Chochma so-called revives and gives life to ba'aleha, the etzem haneshama. That's what he wants to say. But let's continue. The yesh leimer, I'm sorry, the tzrichim leimer. And we have to say, shezeu k'moshe kosa b'sefer shel bein perik yud zayin, that this is what it says in Tanya, chapter 17. Here you see the Rebbe Rashab expanding himself into explaining Tanya, Vartzuk with different Tanyas here. So Ageres Hakedesh Siman Dal being explained with Tanya Perik Yud Zayin. What does he say there? So he's explaining how could you say that? This seems like a strange, bizarre statement that the Nekuda Primis Halev is more concealed than the Chitzenis Halev. That Chitzenis Halev is more possible to reveal it, or that the Chitzenis Halev is more revealed, or at least easier to reveal. What's the logic? You would seem the other way around, that Etzem HaNefesh always remains intact. It says in Perek Yutes, Afilu Kal Shebekalim, when it comes to something that challenges their faith will be Mesiras Nefesh. So how could your Chitzenis Halev be more revealed or capable of being revealed in Golus than Primis Halev? So he says you have to say and explain it with chapter 17. What does he say in chapter 17? Ki meiche b'reshusei. That's the key. Meich shalt al alev. Your mind is in your control. It's at your volition. It's in your reshus. It means it's in your reshus, your control. The yachal is beinin bay, and you can contemplate in it. You can use your mind to contemplate anything that you desire. In other words, Golus is not in our control. The fact that the neshama was sent to this earth before the fact that the neshama was sent, that's not up to us. God decided, your neshama must come down to this world. So your etzem neshama is now concealed in the Begadim Tzeim, Levushim Tzeim, and the Tevis Elam Haza of the Gufa Nefesh Habamis. But your faculties are in your control. You can decide, I want to use my mind now and learn Torah and contemplate on Golus and contemplate on what my neshama really is like. That is in your control. So in other words, therefore, you have capacity to do something about this Golus. The mere fact that the etzem neshama is here, that's not up to us. But the Reshus Meche b'Reshus Yechlus Bein Beikechol Sheyechpes. As we actually see. Now, I just want to stop for a second. This seems to be going completely off where he began the whole discussion. So he was talking about how he's talking about Atzilus, where the Keiches HaNefesh are like a Levush HaMiyuchad, Levush HaAtzmi, as opposed to Levushim of Biyah. And he's using Keiches HaNefesh and specifically Chochma now to demonstrate that on one hand, it's not the Nefesh, not Elikus. On the other hand, it's an expression of Elikus. So I just not want to forget the train of thought here. And yet he's going now into a whole discussion, a very Avedic discussion of how a person, of what happens here with the Chochma Techai Ba'aleh, how Chochma plays a vital role. But if you think about it, it's actually the topic in Aveda. Because remember, the whole purpose of Atzilus is to help reveal Elikus in Biyah. That even when the neshama is beguf, down below, and it's covered up, you should be able to recognize the divine. So explaining how Chochma of Atzilus is a klei hashra, and it lapses to the nefesh, tells you that Atzilus has the power to reveal within us that lakus that's hidden inside of us. That's what essentially he's saying here. But let's read it all together, but that's where he's going with this. So you have here the Aveda of this whole process of revealing Atzilus, or maybe even Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Okay. As we see, we actually see. Chush always means something you can touch, or you actually see, not just theoretically. We actually see. What do we see? Ta'arotzen, desire, ef shelavir leizgalus, im lo yeshno laharotzen. What does im lo yeshno laharotzen mean? I guess he means, the language is not so common. He's saying, you can't reveal desire if there isn't a desire that's already there somewhere. In other words, you can't just create a desire out of the blue. It has to be some source, somewhere where that desire is hidden and embedded, or else you wouldn't be able to reveal it. In other words, if you see someone, let's say, wants a house, it's because there's a ratzon hamuchlat b'atzmusei, in core soul, there's a desire for it. That's what I think he's saying. I may be wrong. That's why I'm qualifying it, but it sounds like it. So let's go with that approach until we are proven wrong or we're confirmed that that's what it means. However, he says in the parentheses, however, there's a way, if you remember, we learned that there's a way to bring the ratzon, you compel it and Kabbalah sale. Like he says, Commissioners, so if you go back to page I believe it's bottom of page 1156. Yeah. So there he said, every Jew wants to do Torah mitzvahs. The reason you're forcing him is because his Yetzer Hara is stopping him from revealing his true desire. But the true desire is there. The only thing is you have to force it out. So you could have two ways that you reveal a pre-existing desire. Either in a regular way, you just reveal it, or through forcing it, or like afterwards, he says on top of 1157, through Kabbalah sale. That you right now don't desire, but because the Torah says so, you force yourself to want it, but really you do want it. Talk there about the Ratzon of Yosher Chezer. That was a discussion with the whole piece about how the Ratzon reveals the Etzem. Okay, so he says like this now. You can't bring a Ratzon into action, you can't reveal a Ratzon unless there's an existing, something that pre-exists. The only thing is that the way to bring it out could be through compelling it or through Kabbalah sale, just accepting the yoke without necessarily feeling that you should desire it.
By giving a get, you can force something.
I just said, V'gam eine yechel lahatis harotzen. It's also, not only can you not create a desire if it's not there in the first place, he says you also cannot incline, you cannot change a desire to a different direction. If he's b'teikev harotzen, he has a very strong desire a certain way, you cannot shift him or move him in a different manner if he has a strong desire for something. So in other words, desire is number one, not created. You can't create it, and you can't even redirect it. What could you do? You could defy a rotzen. In other words, you could say, even though I'm hungry, but I'm not going to eat today because it's a fast day. Or you could say, since I had a bad dream, I'm going to do a tainus today. And the halacha is you're allowed to fast because for him, the tzar of a tainus, that is his enig. So that's what Tzeineh, as the Shulchan Aruch says. So you override the natural enig Shabbos due to the fact that you are desiring now something else. In other words, the bottom line is you can't change, you can't create a desire, and you cannot shift it. You can just ignore it. You can defy it. And by doing so, you can also change a desire in a matter of over extended time. Excuse me. So you see here, it does say you can change, but it's only over time. It's not immediate. So in other words, if a person works hard in eskafia and continuously refrains from indulging in certain things, you could change your desire, but that is an aveda. What he's saying here is basically, let's see where he's going with this. So what he's saying wants to say is that the Ratzon, because it's closer to the Etzem HaNefesh, you don't have control over it. You can't create it. It has to be there or be not there. And you can't shift it. Aval HaSeichel, intelligence, on the other hand, Yechel Le'avil Idei Galus. We're capable fully of bringing it, revealing it, bring it in a revealed state. I'm not sure what he's saying. Can't you also reveal Ratzon? Okay, we'll see in a minute. We'll go back to this, he says. And also, v'gam yichelem lahatese lahaskil be'efen kach u'be'efen kach. And you could also persuade, you could also cause that a person should shift and change the way they understand an idea in this manner or in that manner. It doesn't have that element of firmness that this is how it is. The only thing you can do is ignore it, but you can't change or shift it. I'm trying to understand what he's saying here. He's saying seichel you could reveal, and rotzen, if it doesn't exist, you can't reveal it. I'm not sure what he's saying here.
Maybe it means you can go. Go ahead.
I was just wondering.
Whoever's not speaking, if you can mute, because it's, who wants to say something?
I think it's a common experience to, you can wake up somebody, get them involved, wake up his intellect, just break it out easily, quickly. It's not like such a deep effort to give birth to something that doesn't exist.
And by rotzen?
Ratzin, it's talking about giving birth to Ratzin. That's pretty deep. But seichel, it's something very superficial. And, it's a good idea. Would you like to hear about it? That kind of thing. That's not such a deep, difficult task, I think.
It's a lot easier to come up with an idea than to come up with a rutzing. A new idea and a new rutzing.
Yeah, apparently that's what he's saying, something like that. That to create a new rotzen is not possible. And you can't shift a rotzen. So you could either ignore it, like he said, and time maybe change it, but not initially. Now, I'll tell you where I got confused. And seichel, yes, it's easier. You could, just like you said, here's a good idea. In other words, you can create a seichel and you can shift a seichel. But here's what I was concerned with. He said, let's say the rotzen for having a home, ein adam b'loi bayis. So there's a rotzen atzmi in you to have a home. There's no such thing with seichel. You don't say seichel atzmi that you have to understand 2 + 2 is 4. It's not an atzmi. Rotzen, in other words, rotzen is something wired within us. So either you have it or you don't have it. Seichel doesn't have to be wired within you. Intelligence is wired within us. But an idea, like you said, the haskell seichel, words he used, you can bring up any idea, any new idea, and you can change ideas. A person can have an idea and then completely change to a different perspective if they're convinced or they understand it differently. You don't have that in Ratzin. Ratzin is part of our wiring, so to speak. So that's why Ratzin, like he said before, with Etzem HaNefesh, it's much more concealed. Because you don't have B'keich, it's not B'reshusei. We don't have the ability to create a Ratzin that's not there. What I was confused was that since the Ratzin is, I think that's what he's saying here. So my confusion was wrong. I was thinking, one second, if you have a Ratzin embedded in your Etzem, then you could reveal it, just like you could reveal Seichel. But that's the point. It's embedded already. You're not creating it. You're revealing it. And what he says, in other words, you can only reveal something that's already there. Seichel does not need to be there first for you to conceive of an idea. That's what you guys said is correct. I'm just confirming it. I was just So let's say the Ratzon to be Mekayim Torah and mitzvahs is there. You need Keifanesi, you need to force them, or you need Kabbalah Sale to, so to speak, bring that Ratzon alive. And then you ultimately recognize that's your true Ratzon. You didn't create it, because if you did create it, the get would be possible. It would be a get mu'usa, a forced get. That's not that. So in other words, Rambam says clearly, it's not, because it's really what you want. With Seichel, you don't have that element. It doesn't have to be aligned with any inner essence of who you are. Seichel is more, as you, I don't know, the word superficial, I wouldn't use it, it's a koyach. It's not etzem nefesh. It's not so much a reflection of the etzem nefesh. So it's actually very consistent back there to what I've said about Ratzon in Anochi Anochi. Just a second, I just want to see something there. It may be relevant. Yeah, koyach chutz la'atzmas hanefesh. He said this clearly on page 1156, this whole topic. You could read the koyach haseichel yuli atzmi through Yegia and Erchezer and questions. But the Ratzon is not that way. Okay, it's very clear, yeah.
He's not pointing out that you can create a Ratzon very easily by a Seichel. It's a good idea.
Hold on. What I want to say is that he says that the Ratzon from the Koyach Atzmi is not b'derech nivdel. That's the point I wanted. Shekel in the chutz la'atzmas hanefesh. Okay. Okay, that was an example for Oyer. It's a higher level that the Oyer is not chutz la'etzem. First Eifon Habitl. One minute. Okay, fine. Continuing on here. So now there's another parenthesis.
Just a question, do you mind?
Go ahead.
To create a Ratzon, it's very easy with a good Seichel. Seems only saying that to have make a Ratzon directly from will, that's what you can't do.
Where do you see that he says that Seichel makes it that you can easily create a Ratzon?
He doesn't say it, but I was just saying that's such a simple thing. He's only targeting Ratzon as Ratzon itself. That's what it seems.
Well, Ratzon doesn't mean here that someone convinces you to go try to eat sushi when you didn't want to eat, because that's not what he means by Ratzon here. Here, Ratzon, he's talking about a Ratzon, a true desire in the soul, real desires, not superficial desires. I don't think he means that here. Because then the whole case would fall apart. Because then what does it mean? Or you have to say that even if you...
I didn't mean that either.
Oh, so what were you saying? I didn't understand what you're saying.
In other words, not. I don't think he's referring to the etzem ratzon of a person like has to have a home, etc., etc. He's talking about something.
By the way, I think he means that as well. I do think he means that.
Oh, that's only revealing. That's not making, though.
No, exactly. That's why
you only reveal. You wouldn't need the whole idea.
That's why it works well here.
That would work by, but that'd be mocking us. So that wouldn't be the end of Kabbalah soul to make to bring out a desire.
Kabbalah sells a different scenario. We're not talking about Kabbalah.
Of course, he wants to do the right thing.
I'm not sure. I'm confused here. What are you trying to say that we haven't said?
Derek Hechrach, God was old to make a ratzon.
We learned that, but that either
one thing
the
he
two
meant
scenarios, he said
is
that's a
that-
possibility that one of the ways to reveal the Ratzon is through Hechrach and Kabbalah Sel.
Yeah, right.
But there are other ways to reveal the Ratzon. Like a person who wants to build a
Yes,
house.
that's a new ratzon? Is that a new
No,
ratzon
it's
that he's
all
making
it's
with
all
Kabbalah
in there.
Sel?
It's all in there already. That's the point. You're not creating a new Ratzon. That's the whole point. With Seichel, you can create something new.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be there before. That's why you can, yeah.
With Seichel, you can make a branch of.
Are you, let me just get something clear. I'm confused. Are you asking a question? Are you making a statement? One second. Are you asking a question? Or are you making a statement?
I don't know. But I was pointing out, he doesn't mention the idea of bringing a Seichel, a ratzon out by say.
We can't hear you now. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Why now?
We cannot hear you. Your connection is bad. We couldn't hear you. Okay. Let me continue here.
I have one more just point, if you don't mind. If we add a word, the yeshnei, let's say like yeshnei shaychus laharatzon.
Why would you add a word that the Rebbe Rashab didn't add?
Yeah, I'm just saying. Well, that shaychus wouldn't be the right word, but I'm saying if he has a connection to he has to have a connection to the ratzon.
What does lo yeshnu haratzon? Lo yeshnu haratzon means that if the haratzon didn't exist, you couldn't bring it to Gili. That's what he's saying. We can't hear you. There's too much noise. Yeah. Okay. I think
did you respond to my question? Because I couldn't.
I didn't hear a question.
The question was, you were talking about bread.
We can't hear you. Okay, let me continue on. I can't hear you, so let me continue on. Okay. And he's soon going to explain in a minute why. He's soon going to give another qualification. Because the Ratzon, as he's going to explain, is hardwired within us. It's part of the Etzem HaNefesh. And therefore, if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. Seichel is a koyach outside of the Nefesh. That's what he's saying, basically. And that's why it's Bereshusei, we have the power to use our minds, like he said from Tanya Perik Yud Zayin. That's why the Chitzenius Halev is more revealed or capable of being revealed. Because it's coming through the mind, it's not coming from the Etzem. So now he adds another qualification in the parentheses. V'gam yichem lahatesi lahaskil beifan kach lebeifan kach. Im loy shemu urve b'zeh rotzen sheretz lahaskil daf beifan kach. Aha. So now he's qualifying. Since you just said that the rotzen cannot be changed and rotzen cannot be created, so to speak, it has to be there in order to reveal it. So what happens if you want to understand the, let's say your actions are you're stubborn, and you want to understand something a certain way. So then this rule falls off. The idea that that seichel can always be generated and can change is only im loy me'urav, im loy she'me'urav b'zeh. If in it is not mixed in a rotzen that wants to understand the idea only one way. Aval bli sarvus harotzen. If you don't have any mixture, in other words, there's no desire a certain way, you can understand the idea in a number of ways. The Rebbe Rashab is just being very thorough here. He's explaining if Ratzon comes into play, we back to the same problem. You can't change something that Ratzon has a certain, is set on. Umashakosov, kikola sheyachbetz. He's like asking a question. So why did you say kikola anything you desire? If desire is not subject to anything, it's only a certain kav, a certain wiring one way. What do you say? Kikola sheyachbetz. So he says nira hakavona. It appears that the kavona is the intention, and that means gam beratzon hanelam.
What is kechol asher yachbetz? Kechol asher yachbetz. What is this?
I just explained. I just asked the question. Did you? I just explained. Nira, let me finish and then I'll go over it again. Nira hakavona. This seems to be the kavona, the intention. Gam beratzon hanelam. Also in the hidden Ratzon, or in the outer dimension of Ratzon altogether. Oh boy. Okay. I need to research this a bit more. What it seems to me that he's trying to qualify, he's saying you just said that Ratzon wants something, you can't change it. In other words, it's a certain way. And if Ratzon wants to understand Seichel a certain way, that's it. It's not flexible. So what does it mean? Anything he desires. In other words, desire can go any way. And he seems to be answering. I'm not sure how he's answering, but he looks like he wants to say that neither the kavana is also on the hidden Ratzon or the chitzenis Ratzon l'gaim. So what does he mean by Ratzon hanelam? I honestly do not know what it means right now, pshat. I need to do a little more thinking. What he means in this last line in the parentheses. So we'll get back to it, okay? It's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Some things we understand, some things we don't understand right away. Now back to outside the parentheses. Now he's explaining why is it the case then? That with Ratzon, if it doesn't exist, in other words, if it's not there, there's no Ratzon. You can't shift it around with the qualifications he made. Seichel, you can generate, you can change. This is due to the fact Shaseichel hu rakoyach. The seichel is only a faculty. Lo yispashtus mina etzem. It's not an expression, an extension from the etzem like Ratzon is. L'chein yechem levi'ai u'latesei. That's why you can bring it to the fore. These galus, he said, you have control to reveal a seichel, not a hidden seichel. It means to say to generate an idea in a revealed way. And latese, and to shift it, you can change direction. And now he answers the question. That's why Chochma techaya ba'aleh. This was all to explain the Ageres HaKedesh, where he said Chipnimius Halev remains covered up in Golus, B'shivya, hostage. But Chitzenius Halev, you can reveal, or it's already more revealed. He explained that with Perek Yud Zayin. Why? Because Chitzenius Halev is Seichel Amidus, that is in our control. The Shusei. And that's why you have the ability to bring it. You cannot control the etzem, like the Ratzon. You can't control the etzem. Since the Eibush to put the etzem on the Neshama, meaning the Kudah Pnimis Halev in Golus, that's it. You could control, however, the faculty, because the faculty is not the etzem haneshama. Well, l'chein, and that's why you need chochma. L'chein, a chochma techaya ba'aleh, because ba'aleh is talking about the etzem nekudas primis halev of a Ageres HaKedesh siman dalet. That is gone into a state of golus, and you have no control over that. What do you have control over? The seichel. That's why chochma, which is seichel, even though it's rooted in the etzem hanefesh, which is higher, Techaya, it revives, it vitalizes, it energizes. L'kashra, to bind it, b'mekeda be'ein sof baruch hu, to bind it to Ein Sof Baruch Hu, ayidei hisbonenus v'asoge b'gdulas Hashem, through a contemplation and a comprehension of the greatness, the grandeur of God. Shemezeh yispalu gam haguf v'nefesh habamis. Through this contemplation, you cause that also the body and the animal soul become excited, stimulated. Li is b'bchinas bittul, to be in a state of sublimation, or b'bchinas ava l'Hashem, ava b'chol levavcha b'shnei tzerecha, an ava l'Hashem, and ve'ena ma'alimim u'mastirim, and then they're of course in a state they're not concealing and not covering. I'll explain in a moment. So you're going from the bottom up. The etzem hanefesh has been placed in prison, in Golus. But you can go from the bottom up by taking chitzenius halev, by starting to work on yourself, using Chochma, that brings to midas, that affects the guf nefesh habamis, to feel on its terms the pain and the challenge, and that in turn stimulates ba'aleha, which is the etzem hanefesh. And through this will reveal the core soul in a form of connection, v'yischabris, and joining, union, be'ein sof baruch hu, top of page 1165. Mashenkin b'lei das nefesh leitev. Oh wow, he's explaining. Mashenkin without das, which here without chochma being a das, talking about chochma in general. Das nefesh leitev. It's not good for the soul. If it doesn't have das, the soul is not in a good place. Okay, let me explain. I'm going to explain with psychological, two schools of psychology. We know there's behavioral psychology and there is therapeutic psychology. One focuses on your behavior. Even though you fundamentally are, let's say, in a certain place with your own challenges, but behave like a mensch and you become a mensch. Say thank you, show gratitude, even though you're not fully there. Another approach is no, let's go into the inner wiring of the person and rewire them, or go back to their childhood and figure out why they're angry, why they're fearful, why they abusive, and try to fix it from within. Now, the question is always asked, is Torah behavioral or therapeutic? On one hand, we know mitzvahs don't ask you if you're in a good mood or not. You do it. You behave a certain way, even if you're not fully there. On the other hand, we know Torah, Chassidus especially, is all about Avedis HaNefesh. You want to refine yourself from within, Aveda Pnimius, not just action-based. It's also Kavona, Ava, Yira, and so on. The answer is both. They're both needed al pi Torah. Think of it like this. If you have oil deep in the ground or water deep down under the earth, on one hand, you want to just reveal that. On the other hand, there's too many layers of earth above it, so you have to dig from above. And if you can, work also from below. So all of Tanya really is based on these two approaches. Until the end of chapter A17, what some Chassidim call the Derech, Arucha V'Ktsara. There, it's all about Hisbonenus. You have a lev, you have a heart, impulsive heart. The animal soul rides on it, all the taivas. But you're also born with innate, natural moyach shal ta'alev, as he says in chapter 12. The teva tel dos. B'tedose b'teva yitzirase, shekach neitzera adam b'tivei. Alter Rebbe says in Pegid Beis that we are natural me'ach shal ta'alev. Me'ach shal ta'alev is not revealing the etzem haneshama that you have. It's working from the outside in. Like he says, shebechol rega b'keichei sheberitzene shel ha'adam. Lishleit or hagbir, he can control any moment his taivas. And as soon as you have a negative thought or any desire, you can push it away. You can't control whether the thought will come to you inadvertently, but you can control whether you're going to dwell on it. This is behavioral. What do you mean it's behavioral? In the sense that it's innate, that you have the power, like he said it, in chapter 17, he repeats that. The words are, he could at any moment, you can contemplate on godliness. And though your etzem is not yet really working, even though it's concealed beneath the surface, through the outside in, you are imposing on yourself and say, I'm going to control myself. You have that ability. And when you do, comes then the prokim after Perik Yud Zayin, Perik Yud Chesana, and says that be'etzem, there's a nekudah pnimius salev. You have the nekudah sayipintli yid. Everyone has it, ava musuteres. However, it's concealed, and it's always beating inside of you. That's from within. So when you work from that, mayach shal ta'alev, through your avodah, and then you also have that inner heart, the inner love beating within. When those meet, then you have true transformation. Like he says here, first comes the mayach is in your control. Even in Golus, you have the ability to completely to contemplate on godliness. You may be lazy, you may be difficult, but you can do it. At the same time, that then in turn will cause the etzem hanefesh to come alive. Chochma is like the moich shal ta'alav that I'm saying. And the chay ba'ala is it's awakening and stimulating the libi eir. Even when I'm yeshena, even when I'm asleep, my libi primus alev is alive and awake. And then it becomes bizgalus. So seichel has that power. Rotzen is like his pashtus etzem hanefesh. The rotzen, you cannot do that to the rotzen. The rotzen is there, like he said, ava mesuteres, it's embedded, but you cannot reveal it without on its own, because it's in golus now. Whereas the chochma you can. This is what the Alter Rebbe says on the pasuk Vasiresi leva even. V'nesati lecha lev shel basar. So it says la'asid lavi. The Eibishter says, I'll remove your heart of stone, the heart of stone, and I will give you a heart of flesh. As the Alter Rebbe, why doesn't it say Vasiresi es meyecha even? Why doesn't it say I will remove your brain of your mind of stone, your blocked head, your blocked mind? So Alter Rebbe says because the moyach is in our control. We can control what we're going to think about and contemplate on. The lev is not in our control in Golus. That's why Hashem has to remove it. It's mamish consistent with what he's saying here. So all this is coming to explain how, in the parentheses, that the hashira of the nefesh is in Chochma, and that's why Chochma techay ba'aleh. So the nefesh resides in Chochma, and Chochma has the ability to revive the nefesh. That's why he says afterwards, "Avol makom mokim ein haseichel mahus va'atzmus hanefesh." Going back, nevertheless, seichel, as much as the nefesh resides in it, and has the ability to inspire and stimulate the nefesh, the seichel is still not the core and essence of the nefesh. It's only that the nefesh unites with the power of intelligence. So that's what he's established here. Should we end the parentheses or should we stop here? I'll go to the end of the parentheses already.
Good go, yeah.
And therefore, now he's going to explain how a seichel has an effect on the soul the other way around too. Here we spoke the positive, how seichel can uplift, can revive the soul. Now he says, that's why when you invest your mind in opposite things of elikus, Chochmas chitzenius, outer wisdom, which is referring to non-Torah wisdom, that draws down, drags down the nefesh, God forbid, because the nefesh resides there. Just as Chochma has the power to revive the nefesh, it also has the power to draw the nefesh down into a very low level. Shegam v'hainu, which means shegam harotzen mishtanu misalam. Oh wow! Now Seichel has the power to affect that. Also, the rotzen changes and gets concealed. I guess he means the rotzen atzmi sheba nefesh that's connected to godliness, because now the Seichel has its own way, has the power to draw a nefesh, which is a pure soul, with a rotzen telekus. So the Seichel, when you use it for the wrong thing, can drag it all down and change and conceal. That also the desire gets changed and concealed within it, the divine hergish, feeling. And its etzem mahuse gets changed. So just like it can awaken the etzem mahus, it can also change it. Well, that's very strong terms here. And when he applies his intelligence in divine matters, misala ha-nefesh umizgala boy harotzen eliki. The nefesh gets elevated and revealed in it the divine desire. The kol zeh hu mitzad islapshus ha-nefesh b'seichel u'misachid bey. All this is due to the fact that this nefesh, being despite it being beyond the seichel, nevertheless it manifests within it in a pneumistic way and gets united with it. And yet at the same time, the seichel is still only a faculty of the soul, but it's a very united faculty. Like I said, with the Aron HaKodesh, it's very united with the Eibush, with the nefesh. That's the whole parentheses. So basically, he brought into Aveda here. We'll see soon where this leads. He brought into Aveda the whole discussion of how Koiches HaNefesh are, on one hand, levushim, on the other hand, they're connected, but especially Seichel is actually very connected and very much manifest in Nefesh, even though the Nefesh is beyond it. Both ways. It can redeem the Nefesh, and it could also drag it down in dark places. I never saw Mishtana be'etzem ohuse. I guess the rotzen eliki can be fundamentally changed, obviously the fisha, temporarily, when you draw down. That's what he says in Tanya, Perek Ches, Chochma Tzitzin is malbish hanefesh bechabat shebeklipa. It's much worse than other Averis, because you're taking the mind where the nefesh resides and you're using it for opposite. So that's why philosophies and that are about, when you corrupt the mind or pollute a mind, it's much worse than when you pollute midas and maisa, because you're taking the most powerful keli for the nefesh and you're dragging it into. That's why you see people who have been, whose minds were what should I say, been affected by foreign thoughts. It's far worse than other types of challenges.
If a guy's a scientist who does something secular, I mean, it's always going to be against it, or does it have to be something?
He didn't say science. Chachmas chitzenius means if the science is used l'shem shemayim, it's not science per se. It's once your mind has decided there's no God, or that you are
Philosophy.
basically once your mind has been convinced that there's God, no God, and basically loses its bittul. That's what he's talking about. He's not in the Perek Ches, he says two examples. If you use the Chochmas for kardim lachter bei, in other words, like an axe, to use it for kedusha purposes, or like the Rambam and the Ramban v'siyaitam that were able to derive from it an understanding of Torah and so on. It's a different story. We're not talking about that scenario. We're talking about Chochmas Chitzenius, like someone once typed. Chitzenius means it just focuses on the end in itself. The Chochma is focusing the external, not on that it's a divine wisdom and it's a way of the divine to express himself. If you learn science to understand God's powerful ways, so that's that part of his bonus in Elikus. When you divorce wisdom from God, and it becomes you are the smart one, and so on, and focusing on thoughts that are opposite of godliness, that's what he's referring to.
So you have to direct your secular activities of Chochma towards the Eibishter and keep in that context, and you're okay.
Look at the end of chapter 8 in Tanya.
But even this explanation, this is only the rotzen shebenefesh elokis, but the nefesh elokis is not mishtane. Am I right?
Pashtus, yeah. Yeah.
Rotzen agolui even. I don't know if rotzen anelam is mishtane.
And then, of course, you have to ask the question, how does that stem with what he said earlier, that the rotzen doesn't change?
He says it changes very slowly, if I remember correctly.
Okay, let's stop here. After thinking through a little more, we learned a lot here, a lot to review here. But I think it's getting there. Page 1165, 6 lines down.